Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host, here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to unbox and take a first look at the second edition of Cuba, the Splendid Little War from Victory Point Games and Tabletop Tycoon. The game is designed by Javier Garcia de Gabiola, with artwork provided by Engar Adirasa. And I apologize, I'm sure I've mispronounced those names. Sorry about that. The game is for 2 players, ages 14 and up, plays in around 90 to 120 minutes, and carries an MSRP of $50. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got Cuba, the Splendid Little War. Now, if you have been following the Gaming Gang for quite some time, you might recall I reviewed the first edition of Cuba, the Splendid Little War, back in 2013. Yes, it has been quite some time. So this is the second edition, which is now available through Tabletop Tycoon and their Victory Point Games imprint. So let's get rid of the shrink wrap first of all. Cut down a little bit on the glare. So do want to mention that the fine folks over at Tabletop Tycoon were kind enough to provide me with this review copy, but neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this coverage with you. And these days, it's very important that you know that. So let's take a look at the back here. Cuba, the Splendid Little War, 1895 to 1898, is a 2-player simulation of the Cuban War of Independence and the Spanish-American War. One player controls the forces of Spain, seeking to crush the rebellion and retain control of Cuba. The other controls the Cuban rebels fighting for their independence and the U.S. forces that may intervene. Players must make key strategic decisions to achieve their objectives in the midst of major and consequential events, including disease, ambushes, assassinations, and yellow journalism. Can you use your limited resources and take advantage of the unpredictable nature of war to secure victory? Well, you're going to find out. Let's crack this open. So we get the little Tabletop Tycoon brochure. So we got the rule book. Let's start there. If I recall correctly, this was a bit card driven. And if I seem to recall correctly, the Spanish player was trying to also prevent the United States from getting involved in the war. So it shows we've got our game board, a couple of player aids, the rule book we're looking at right now, 62 cards, informational markers, unit counters, and we will get on into the rules. I'll tell you what, the presentation of this is night and day from the first edition, that's for sure. So we got setting up the game. Sequence of play. So we have each round divided into an action phase and an administrative phase. During the action phase, both sides alternate taking actions, starting with the Cuban player. This phase ends as soon as both players pass consecutively. In the administrative phase, check for Cuban instant victory and prepare for the next round. There can be as many as 7 game rounds, but the game can end early in an instant victory if that's achieved. So getting into our die roll modifiers, stacking units, there's no limit to the number of units that can share the same area on the board. Leaders and stacking, naval units and stacking. Says an admiral must be stacked with a fleet at all times. If that fleet is eliminated or removed, the admiral is also eliminated or removed. You may stack fleets with other fleets that belong to the same nation. So we've got our action phase. So you can make coordinated actions. So leadership and the Spanish captaincy general. Playing cards. The cards represent various historical events as well as tactical and strategic methods used by both sides during the war. Each card explains its own effects and any conditions that must be met in order to play that card, along with some brief historical notes. So hopefully the layout of the cards will be a larger font than what we saw when I took a peek at Autumn and Sunset, because those are very, very difficult to read. In fact, I have a review coming soon for Autumn and Sunset, and a huge knock on the game is the tiny print on the cards that make them nigh impossible for anyone over the age of probably 40 to be able to read. So we're getting into combat. Recruiting. So these are some of the various different actions that you can take. So recruiting fighters, burning fields, requesting reinforcements. So we've got our administrative phase. So U.S. stance hardens. If the U.S. has not yet entered the war, advance the U.S. stance marker one space higher on the U.S. war entry track. And then, of course, there's some modifiers to that. So instant victory conditions at any time, if Spanish public support is 0 or no Cuban or no U.S. units or generals are in play, those are instant victories. So that's at any time. Then in the administrative phase, if Spanish public support is 1, or if Spanish public support is equal to or lower than 5 and the Cubans control one city, or if the Cubans control both cities, then those are instant victories during the administrative phase. So discussion of Spanish public support, U.S. intervention. That's when it frees up some U.S. units. So we have winning the war. So we've already discussed those instant victory conditions. So we have the 1898 victory. So at the end of the game. And it says, at the end of the game around 7, remember to check for instant victory conditions as described above. If the U.S. has not entered the war and the Cubans have not achieved any of their instant victory conditions, the Spanish achieve a minor victory and win the game. If the U.S. has entered the war but controls no cities, the Spanish player achieves a notable victory and wins the game. If the U.S. or Cuban forces control one or more cities, the game is a draw. Neither player wins. So it appears that the Cuban player has to win before the final round, so the 7th round. So we've got alternative historical epilogues, an extended example of play. Are we going to get some designer notes? No, we get some scenarios. There we go. All right. So all in all, about 24 pages of rules. No, a little less than that. 22 pages. So there we've got the rule book. So let's take a look at the game board. I don't recall this being a very large board. So we've got cards, 6-sided dice. We've got baggies for the counters. We've got one punch board full of counters and units. Double-sided, pretty thick cardstock on these. So we have got that. We've got our 2 player aids, one for the Spanish player and one for the Cuban player. These are pretty nice. And it looks like we've got a spot here to keep our troops in reserve. So it's showing us the different actions that are available to the Spanish and the Cuban player. They are a little bit different, especially once the U.S. enters, then you have U.S. actions as well. So we've got that. As mentioned, we've got those 6-sided dice And we will look at these cards last. So here's the game board. So we got our round tracker. We also have weather that we have to consider. So here's our sequence of play. We have our two cities right here, Havana and Santiago de Cuba. Combat chart. Here is our U.S. stance and our Spanish public support. And then it looks like we've got a graveyard here to put our defeated units, our eliminated units are going to go into this section here. And pretty thick, pretty nice game board here. Okay, so what we will do is actually zoom in to get a better look at these cards. There we go. And once again, now I have to say, it doesn't look like the font is as tiny as we saw with the Ottoman Sunset, but still, this is pretty small. I mean, there's a lot of empty space here that could be utilized for these cards. So, I mean, I can read it. So, malaria, the opposing player must reduce any one of their land units of their choice by one step. But this flavor text, I can barely make it out. In 1896 alone, 232,714 Spanish troops contracted malaria or yellow fever, black vomit. Between a third and half of all Spanish troops were out of duty during the war, and some 41,000 men eventually died of their illness. So at least, I mean, I can read them. Could have used a little more space taken up on these. I have to say that it seems as if when the files are being sent off to the printer, it appears nobody's really taken a closer look at these cards as far as their readability, because obviously enough, looking at these cards on a computer screen is going to be far different than taking a look at the actual card itself. These cards are pretty nice, though. They have a linen finish, and we have artwork on all of them, so I do dig that. But once again, it seems that there's a little bit of dropping the ball as far as the usability of these cards at the game table. But as I said, the font does seem to be a little bit larger than what we saw on Ottoman Sunset. All right, so just kind of taking a look at some of the various cards here. And I think we should get some U.S. cards. Yep. Merrimack blocks Santiago. Dewey's victory off Cavite. Gatling guns. Panic on the East Coast. Cool. Very nice. So I do like the presentation on these cards. Like I said, could have used a little bigger font. Although the reality is I can read it, just not as easily as I would probably have liked. All right, so we've got our punch board, our two player aids, we've got our game board, we've got our deck of cards, and our dice and rule book. And that is what we find when we take everything from Cuba, the Splendid Little War, outside the box. Once again, this is available now. This is for two players, ages 14 and up. Plays in around 90 to 120 minutes. Does carry an MSRP of $50. And of course, I will have a review of the second edition of Cuba, the Splendid Little War, in the near future. So once again, yes, this is the second edition of the game. Very nice. Very nice. Only knock on it, those cards. So I think part of the issue is that there's historical text. There's like flavor text on all of the cards. And as much as I love that, and I love seeing that kind of stuff in like GMT games releases, the top priority is still to be able to read those cards easily as you play. And that font issue, the size of the font, does create a bit of a problem. All right, anyway, we'll see how things pan out for my review. That is it for this time out. Of course, if you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already, and if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this first look, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. And of course, when you're not watching videos here on the YouTube channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you will not find here on the YouTube channel. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Here's hoping all of you have a wonderful and happy new year. And until I see you next time, I also hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.